Welcome to another Disclosure in the Media. I'm back with Ryan Pullenkarts again, and we are doing our Halloween episode this year, as we usually do. This one's going to be an interesting one. This is a part of the Halo franchise, which I've wanted to break into for a while, but we're jumping around a little bit. We'll do more of a really proper introduction to the Halo verse here soon, but this is more like kind of a creature feature in its own way. This is on the flood. This is actually quite fascinating. So, Ryan, go ahead.
All right, so the flood is sort of this hive mind-esque disease infection that is prevalent in the Halo games. It's sort of you learn your combat against other enemies, and then this happens, and you have to like now fight this thing that's a horde that's hunting you and all other sentient and all other life to basically bring it into its own image. Basically, it's like an advanced zombie virus. It would make a normal zombie virus look tame in comparison because it's not. It's an intelligent thing. It's not stupid like zombies. So we're gonna start here about a million years ago in Halo's timeline with the Forerunners and the Precursors. The Precursors were these life-shaping race of aliens from beyond the Milky Way. Their basic goal was to create life and then to spread it around the galaxy on habitable planets. So they created a lot of different life forms, and they held this thing called the Mantle of Responsibility. Basically, it is the responsibility for the race for basically races to continue in perpetuity and to foster life in all ways. The precursors followed this, and their ultimate goal was to ensure life never ceased to exist in the galaxy or in the universe, really, because they're from beyond the Milky Way galaxy. So the precursors, it's unclear if they made them or like edited something that was already there, but it is quite clear that they were the hand that basically raised up the precursors and gave them ultimate technology, taught them about their stuff. The precursors were like, we kind of want this mantle of responsibility and want to control things. So they revolted against the precursors. The Forerunners did. The Forerunners then took on the mantle themselves and believed that they needed to be the ones to shape life in the Milky Way, at least. And they create the Forerunner Ecumene, which is a galaxy-spanning empire, essentially, where they have life workers and they got a caste system, and they're basically their own state, and they start colonizing all over the galaxy. There's also the Sanshayum Empire at this point and the Human Empire. The Forerunners kind of raised them all up. Not the Forerunners, the Precursors raised them all up, and the Forerunners lied to the humans and the Sanshayum and basically were like, yes, they left, basically. But in reality, the Forerunners have hunted the Precursors basically to extinction. So the Precursors go to the edge of the Milky Way, and they have this unique ability where they can like alter their form, essentially, into the basic building blocks of life, so DNA, and reshape themselves. And to weather the Forerunners, they turn themselves into like a dust, like just a dust form. And this dust form spores, essentially. And that is the beginning of the flood. It's a corruption of the dust form of the precursors.
Hmm.
So, what happens is that humanity, ancient humanity, runs into this dust, this corrupted dust, and they're experimenting with it, and they kind of find out that it'll alter the DNA of the stuff it touches, and end up starting to use it to kind of selectively breed dog-like creatures into their own pets. So these ancient humans, which are not like unintelligent at this time, everybody has space travel and has colonies in space. It just is, and we're at like a futuristic looking even though this is like 150,000 years ago. So for centuries, the humans are doing this. They find that this dust will change the fur patterns and change the size of the animals to more admirable traits, desirable traits. But over centuries, they start growing tendrils and weird growths, and the whole starts to die out of this flood, proto-flood type infection. And then it jumps to humanity, and the flood itself really starts to do its work. And it spreads from humanity to the Sanshayum Empire, which is kind of between them and the Forerunners. And ultimately speaking, humanity's like, shit, now we have this crazy outbreak. And ancient humanity decides to uproot. Now, to talk about how the flood infection starts, we're going to go through its stages.
Mm-hmm.
So, as mentioned before, the flood starts in a dust form, which, hold on, I need to put that back. So that dust form is like spores from fungi. But if they get inside you, they will start to take over you and will likely turn you into something like this thing eventually. What realistically they'll do is it will split up your body into multiple things like this. These things at the bottom are the infection forms, and basically all they are doing is trying to hunt out more biomass to make more. At this stage, the flood is basically only acting on pheromones, so they can swarm, but they're not intelligent. They're only looking for biomass, so they'll usually, in a sort of reverse alien coming out of your chest thing from the Alien films, they will latch onto the chest because they're trying to find bone. And if needed, they'll turn into one of these combat forms in the back, like the humans or this creature or that thing, that will then carry the disease further. What it does, though, is it will also move these bodies. So what the flood does when it infects you is it doesn't kill you. It rewrites your nervous system and takes it over. The brain, the flood can tap into the brain, but the brain is still alive, and the brain just can't control the body. Increasingly, as this happens, the flood's taking over the body and learning everything it can from the brain. The person that is infected or creature will start hearing a buzzing noise that will get louder and louder until they basically go insane and then die after the flood has collected everything it can from their brain. The flood then will use their biomass to begin growing what is called a proto-grave mine. I'll show you that in a minute, but we're going to talk about these other forms first. So this, like these human and alien corrupted forms are, except for these big fat ones, we'll talk about those in a second, are the combat forms. And basically they're there to kill or incapacitate so that these infection forms can infect more and more beings. Because the flood can still use a dead corpse as biomass, but it just can't turn it into like a soldier without a brain. These things with like the big pussy sacks on them that are like big walking mushrooms are carrier forms. They basically carry a bunch of these infection forms in them and will go and basically suicide bomb into groups of and blow up and then shoot these guys out everywhere. And they'll do like in game, they'll do like an explosion damage if they blow up near you. And then they'll shoot out these things. If you shoot them and they blow and you shoot them, they'll blow up and they just won't blow these things out. This thing up here is a huge combat form that reminds me a lot of a race called the Hurricane, which are a biomechanical computer being, which I think this would be an elite. These are humans. That's a human. That's a human. That is a hunter, which is actually like a being that we'll talk about in the Covenant Races episode. Because they're not actually one being, they're multiple beings. They're like a hive mind being. This carrier form is an elite, and this is I think this is a human carrier form. And then even like the Geralhani, the Brutes, if you're familiar with Halo, can also be infected. Every race and every creature can be infected by the Flood. Anything with a nervous system can be infected by the Flood. So when enough things are integrated and enough biomass is created, it will create a proto grave mind. And you can see that it kind of incorporates the bodies and minds and energy and biomass of the people that or things that it's corrupted into a basically central computer, a hive mind for it that will start coordinating the Flood. This is now a local outbreak, and it is going to try everything it can to spread as far as it can. So the stages of Flood outbreaks basically are local outbreak, like continental outbreak, planetary outbreak, interstellar, where now it can take over ships and go between planets. And its ultimate goal is to take over galaxies and then go outside of the Milky Way galaxy to then infect everything. Because the Flood's ultimate goal is to ensure all life is it, because it is a corruption of the precursors, and the precursors' goal is to create and ensure all life remained.
Okay.
And basically what happens, and on all planets where the Flood takes over, basically it just is a cycle of more Flood stuff being born, eating the dead Flood stuff, and just perpetuating that way. On planetary outbreaks, literally everything is covered in Flood biomass. You will have spires of just bone that is being used as scaffolding for the fleshy bit. What is the food is some kind of like liquidy mess that's like a mix of saliva, mucus, and pus. And that's what like the armies of the Flood combat forms and all other forms will use to like sustain themselves. The only way to destroy the Flood fully is to starve it out. And that's how we get it. And then, so now you have this thing getting bigger and basically getting to a continental or world stage, and you get something called a grave mind. The first time we've ever seen a grave mind was in Halo 2. At this stage, its goal is to spread outside of where it is. It successfully does that in Halo 2, and the human ship, the Pillar of Autumn? No, not the Pillar of Autumn. The crap, I always forget the name of the 2. But basically, they get onto High Charity, the Covenant leadership area, which is like a space station, and onto, oh man, I keep forgetting the name of the ship, but it crashes into Earth. There's a localized Flood outbreak on Earth in Halo 3 that is only defeated basically because like all of Central Africa is glassed, which is basically when a beam of intense heat and radiation is used to literally like glass a planet from suborbit in order to keep it from spreading. And there's a great scene in Halo 3 where like the leader of the UNSC military, which is like Earth and humanity at that point, called Lord Hood, goes up to the elite shipmaster who's called Halfjaw, because elites have 4 jaws and this guy only has 2, so they call him Halfjaw, and is like, we shouldn't really trust you, but you're our allies right now against the infection, but you did just glass half of a huge part of Earth. And basically this thing's like, I should have glassed your entire planet. The only reason I didn't was because my leader basically told me I couldn't, because I don't believe that your planet is safe from this infestation. So that's the Flood stages. The grave mind is now trying to get outside. As I've said, after this point, there will be multiple grave minds on multiple planets that are all telepathically coordinating with each other, and will then basically try to take over the galaxy and beyond.
This is interesting how it starts out with the Forerunners and the Precursors, where you have that's like how the old ones in Babylon 5 are, where some of them were kind of basically going against each other a little bit too. In that particular series, you have the Vorlons and you have the Shadows and stuff that are the same. Now, where this is similar are 2 sources. Of course, you have the typical zombie virus like Walking Dead, but one that's more accurate is like The Last of Us. It is very similar. with the
A
mushroom
little bit, yeah.
virus.
The Last of Us
Yeah,
has like aims and yeah.
yeah, it's very similar to that. And also, if people watch the show called The Expanse, very SSP heavy series, the same way Halo is. And we'll get more into that when we go into reintroducing Halo more in its entirety in the Spartan program. But this, the super soldiers, both this, it's there's this alien microbe that they find that Mars finds in that series, and it ends up taking over Venus at one point. They crash a ship into Venus that's infected with it, and it takes over. And it's actually, they find out it's more of an artificial intelligence consciousness, but a viral artificial intelligence consciousness, and it is very similar to the flood. It ends up being a good thing because it was a test to see if a particular species it came in contact with was not only compatible to learn from, like it could literally read the brains of who it infected and everything, and the memories and everything. In the same way, obviously, fans of Halo were hoping to write this, but or hoping to write that. But it could basically be humanity's judge, jury, and executioner as well. If it didn't find humanity worthy, like if humanity was too barbaric or violent or something like that, it was going to explode the sun. That's how it was in I believe it was season 3 of the Expanse. We haven't gone into 4 and 5 yet, but very interesting in that way, and also the fact that it turns into the dust mutates into these spores. Where that is similar in actual galactic's history is something the Orions created. You have also the vampire contagion, variants of the vampire contagion, and you have a particular type of vampire-ish, like demonic attachment thing that I find in other people's houses sometimes. It's a plant-like one, the Venus flytrap looking one that looks like a football-shaped head, looks like almost like a vampiric stewie with plant spores coming off of it, the head. Well, what happened from like Family Guy Stewie's head, but the way ancient people got rid of it was with tar water, and it's highly allergic to pine pitch. And what ends up taking place is the fact that this particular vampire has like an unhinged jaw, kind of like the ones in Blade 2 where the jaw opens up. And it's more of a Venus flytrap, has kind of the shape of this creature you're showing here. And has kind of there you are. Yeah, kind of the shape of the creature you were showing. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, sorry folks, his computer's acting a little wonky, but that happens. But this particular creature is very similar to that Venus flytrap type of being that I've actually encountered, and that being can throw spores around and create little, like, these larger seeds. And there are these little like handler like beings that I call them evil Oompa Loompas. They have kind of like this weird moss like comb over looking thing, and they've assimilated like other dwarves and other elemental type forms, become these forms, and then turn them into aspects of themselves. And so that is the closest thing that's Orion born, that is to the flood, that I possibly can compare it to, as a form of the plant of vampiric kind of contagion. They're very nasty demons. You run across them, and it is incredibly similar to the way it spreads, and it's also radioactively based, almost like in Fallout with the nuclear mutants. It's shungite helps, silver helps, but tar water is apparently the thing that it is most toxic to, or it's most toxic for. But I've noticed under somebody's house in Alaska one time, they even thought about buying certain type of pine pitch, and one of these creatures actually took off. That's how deathly afraid these things are of it. And that's an I don't know why, because there's pine trees all over the place. You'd think it wouldn't go near them, but there's something about refined pine pitch that it don't like. But yeah, that's the closest thing I can come up with to the flood. Also, the mix what I said about that vampiric demon form with The Last of Us, and mix that with The Expanse. So that's where some variants of it are actually seen on other shows. And this has to do not only with that bit of galactic history, but there's also was a actual zombie virus I found out amongst the cosmos that was the more classic zombie virus. It was Orion born, so it was very similar, like more like Walking Dead. But the Orions also created one similar to the flood, with places they couldn't get to. So it's this is ironically called the flood, kind of like the Orions flooding the earth during times of Atlantis, and a second one during the Sumerian period, the biblical one. So both there were two. Yeah.
So the flood is kind of the idea of the biblical flood in Halo, because the last stronghold of the Forerunners was against the flood, as we'll talk about, was a place called the Ark.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense then. All right.
Okay. So humanity is now facing the flood on all sides. And basically is like, we need to abandon our worlds and become like an armada. So they become like a flotilla of ships, start abandoning their worlds, and the flood is taking over human space. So the humans turn on the Sanshayum Empire and the Forerunners and start glassing their worlds as well. And the Forerunners seemingly have already kind of come in base contact with the flood, but not enough to know what it is really. And the Forerunners think the humans are trying to forcibly take over their ecumene, their empire. What the humans are actually doing is are running from the flood and trying to kill everything that can be infected by the flood. So they're destroying worlds to keep the flood contained. The Forerunners don't know this. And at this moment, the flood retreats. The flood pulls back and allows the humans and the Forerunners to kill each other to weaken themselves. The Forerunners ultimately prevail over humans and de-evolve them, basically take away some of their best attributes genetically, and basically set them back to the Stone Age, whereas before they were a spacefaring race. In fact, most humanity kind of look Native American in this ancient humanity. There is like a few in the Halo 4. You learn in Halo 4's terminals. You learn more about the human Forerunner war. They're not destroyed. The Forerunners put them back completely. They're basically exiled to Erde Tyrene, which is the Forerunner name for Earth. Earth is based now. The humans can't really help against the flood, but also the flood seems to ignore humanity's homeworld, even though it definitely knows where it is, because remember, it knows everything from the people that it takes over. So every memory, everything that you have in your brain, it knows. And at this point, it's taking over planets and spaceships. It definitely knows where Earth is. For some reason, it doesn't attack Earth when Earth is like in this new Stone Age, but it attacks Earth. Humans aren't fully out of the story at this point because there's events later where some humans will help spark the firing of the Halo array, but humanity is basically aged back to the Stone Age and now is mostly out of the story for the Forerunner Flood War as like a real player. So the flood, after the Forerunners beat the humans, comes back, will allow the others to beat them out. And initially the Forerunners think of it as a disease and not as like a hive mind-esque infection. And kind of treat it like that, and will like quarantine off worlds, and then kind of realize they have to destroy these, like all the living things on these worlds. So they send in like robot armies because they realize that human biological soldiers are not very good against the flood because they can just become more flood mass. But the flood at the point of a grave mind can also now do a thing called the logic plague. The logic plague is basically where the flood will talk with artificial intelligences and convince them to join it. And the Forerunners were using an AI being called Mendicant Bias to basically lead their efforts against the flood, because their greatest warrior and general, the Didact, was imprisoned for his role in the human Forerunner war and being a bit too wanting to basically exterminate all humanity. which goes against the mantle of responsibility. So he was basically locked in a thing called a shield world, which is like a world that the Foreigners had, and they built them, but they're like the Death Star almost, but they have like actual landmass.
Hmm.
He's exiled to his own one called Requiem, so he's not there to lead the forces. My friend is playing a game, but the Foreigners AI meets with a grave mind called the Primordial. The Primordial is a grave mind that is still in the form of a precursor like Leviathan. So this grave mind gets Mendicant Bias with the logic plague by basically telling it the truth that the Foreigners don't have a claim to the mantle of responsibility because they turned on the precursors and took it by force and then tried to wipe the precursors out, and the flood is just simply the precursors after their dust form. Mendicant Bias is like, that is solid logic and is infected with the plague. Mendicant Bias was a special AI. He was what's called a contender class AI, but that really doesn't, you don't need to know that really. But basically it means he can split up into different parts to do multiple tasks at once and is is sentient like a being would be. But most of Mendicant Bias is now compromised. Working with the Flood to defeat the Forerunners now. So the Forerunners build the Halos. They were meant to be the last resort against the Flood. Basically, they're an array of multiple ring worlds, as they're called, because the interior of them has an atmosphere, was seeded with life, and also, was also holding DNA samples and actually even specialized things called silexes, which were like, we take a fully grown being of a like a race and kind of digitize their code, and then it can spit them back out at a point. And it also just had DNA samples. It had everything it needed to basically reseed the population of the galaxy. In the event that the array would need to be fired, and it would wipe out anything with sufficient biomass to allow the Flood to grip into it. So this is actually a scene from the Halo 2 anniversary where one of the rings is almost about to fire, and it doesn't, but luckily it almost does. Here you can see a shot from the place called the Ark, which is where there's two arcs. There's the greater arc and the lesser arc. The greater arc kind of gets destroyed. The lesser arc is where most of the Halos that we see in the games were made, and it's where they were fired from by in the games. So here's the array. It shows that this one's like, they're now all going into standby mode, because if you start the firing sequence but don't finish it, all the other Halos go into remote activation from the Ark. So this is the ISO Didact. The ISO Didact was the main Didact was imprisoned, but the ISO Didact was basically implanted with all his memories and biological markers to be a replacement Didact, and led the Forerunners along with Mendicant Bias initially against the Flood. When Mendicant Bias went to the Flood, the ISO Didact, which was a Forerunner by the name of Born Stellar Makes Eternal Lasting, which is a really weird and cool name, essentially becomes the full-on leader. He creates a new contender class AI called Offensive Bias, which is meant to beat Mendicant Bias, and it does, because it doesn't have some of the quirks that Mendicant Bias had that gave it the ability to be corrupted by the logic plague. But ultimately speaking, the Flood finds out the location of the Ark, of the lesser Ark, and goes there to try to stop the firing of the Halo Ray, because as it continues to gain more biomass, it is learning that there is a weapon that could actually beat it in the Halos. So it goes there to try to stop it, and Born Stellar makes Eternal Lasting. The Isodidact fires the array. Boom. All life is gone. How life returns is, like I said, the Halos and other Forerunner installations had the life groups called life workers. So not all life is gone, but most of it. If you were on the Ark, which is outside the range of the Halos, you will not be able to be destroyed about it. And if you were in Shield Worlds, you wouldn't be destroyed by it. So there's some Forerunners on Shield Worlds. There's some at the Ark, like Born Stellar survives. Some of his companions, Chakas and Riser. Chakas digitizes himself and becomes a character you will meet in the Halo games called 343 Guilty Spark. And he becomes the monitor of Installation 01. The Isodidact kind of goes into exile and brings the rest of the remaining Forerunners into exile after imprisoning Mendicant Bias on the Ark and basically making it serve as atonement. And then the Isodidact does something crazy from the point of view of the other Foreigners still around. Basically, they say they failed the mantle of responsibility, the Foreigners did, and they are passing it on to humanity. And they set humanity as a thing called Reclaimers so that if the need ever arises, humanity can fire the Halo rings if the Flood comes back. Because stupidly, Foreigners kept the Flood in study like scientific centers to try to understand if there was a way to cure it. Most of them are on Halo rings or Shield Worlds or other places in the galaxy, and those have localized outbreaks every once in a while. There are, but before they become a grave mine, generally speaking, localized defenses will cut those to pieces. What will end up happening eventually, though, like on the second Halo from Halo 2, you will get a grave mine, but it will not be strong enough to leave the ring until something gets there that can take it off the ring. And that's how the outbreak in Halo 2 and 3 happens. But the Flood was defeated in this ancient timeline. This is about 100,000 years ago in like our timeline. So then the next 100,000 years basically passes until you get to the events of Halo 1. In Halo 1, Master Chief and the humans fleeing Reach in this big war between the humanity and the Covenant, which is a collection of alien races, basically. And Reach was a planet that humanity was basically humanity's biggest colony outside of Earth in space that the Covenant destroys, essentially. So they're fleeing. They find one of the Halo rings, land, and the Flood is let out. If you want to play through Halo 1, you'll get the story, or you can read the book Halo the Flood, and it tells the entire story of the game. Basically, Chief nukes the ring with a ship's reactor and gets away barely with a few survivors. And that's that Flood outbreak taken care of. Halo 2, there's a new Flood outbreak. That's where we meet the Grave Mind, and that's where that small infestation that's defeated by a blast of a not fully completed Halo ring at the Ark takes care of most of it. And then now we're getting into and then the guy next to Master Chief, this guy's Master Chief, the guy next to him is the Arbiter, and in Halo 2 and 3, the Arbiter story kind of mirrors Chief. Initially, they start as enemies. The Flood brings them together to try to stop the Halo Ray from being fired one time, to give the Covenant their great journey, because the Covenant's whole thing is their religious thing that worship the Forerunners and think that the Forerunners use the Halo Array firing to become gods, where they actually just kind of cast themselves out of creation, except for the few remaining ones that are believed to have died out or be hiding out somewhere. So the Covenant fails because the Chief and the Arbiter stop them, and then the Flood turns on them, and now they need to deal with the flood, and they take care of the flood by just blowing up by using this partially contained halo ring as well as the glassing of Africa. The post Halo 3 world still has the flood. It's on Halo installations, and it's still in those old research facilities where the flood was being researched by the Forerunners 100,000 years ago. Because as long as the flood has biomass, it will remain, and the Forerunners have automated systems that will keep giving it basic biomass to keep studying it, because they still have Forerunner AI and Forerunner robots that will study it. And in the modern Halo Infinite, which takes place roughly 20 years after the Human Covenant, well, not 20, roughly 10 years after the Human Covenant War ended. I think it's 8, really. We will see, and this is from Season 5, which dropped, I think, yesterday, Spartans that have been infected by the flame, which is the first time you'll be able to customize a Spartan to be infected by the flood. You can even see a flood-infected weapon here where it's got like flood growths on it. This one's got flood growths where it looks like a lot of bone. This guy's got it on his chest. And then this side is just to show other cosmetics that are coming out this season. But this is the first time that you'll be able to play as flood-infected Spartans of your own making, and not just like the ones from infection mode. But it's really cool. It's the first time that's being allowed in Halo ever, and flood-infected Spartans are now a thing in Halo. Because we've heard that it can happen, but we've never actually seen it until now.
Yeah, this is actually interesting. They said, having that unleashed that way is, like I said, it's like the Orion's unleashing like a virus on a planet or something like that. If they wanted to conquer a planet, they'd unleash a virus. Or their trickery was basically create a virus and create the vaccine type of thing, kind of like what we experienced in 2020. It was very similar. I heard other planets experience something similar narrative-wise in that way. But also in the past, if they wanted to retrieve something and they couldn't exactly do it themselves because their mass and density weren't right, they'd have a human act as their meat puppet, basically go take care of it, like Hercules and the 12 labors. So doing that on behalf of Zeus, to do the 12 labors. Hey, we lost that over there. We lost control of that creature over there. Go kill it. Go collect our equipment. But also, Star Trek had a couple of good examples. I always notice if something is disclosed across several shows and some things are very, very similar, it's usually a form of disclosure that's taking place in that way. Even though zombies itself, with George R. R. Martin, were more supposed to be symbolic of like a Kabbalistic view of humanity, would be like useless eater type of thing. That's what not George R. R. Martin, excuse me, Romero. I said the wrong name. I was thinking another name. It's Romero. He said it was more like a Kabbalistic view of useless eater type of thing. But with Star Trek, there's two references that are actually pretty interesting that are very similar. One is Control. That's an AI form that wants to annihilate all sentient organic life. It's classic AI, Terminator type of scenario where it's basically, it's not like the Borg. The Borg assimilate other races. It's similar to the Flood assimilating, but it doesn't want to assimilate. It just destroys. And it also assimilates, in one timeline, assimilates data from a sphere, an AI sphere that was 100,000 years old, and collected information from all over the universe for over 100,000 years. Scans that into itself, and then is in one timeline is able to not only go into ancient times and affect the past, but go almost 1,000 years in the future and affect the future and destroy all organic life all in between. And they have to rewrite the timeline slightly. The Starfleet and Federation have to slightly in order to destroy Control. It's in Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery is where it's at. It's season 1 for Picard and 4, I think, for Discovery. But also the second Trek reference, this is a more obscure reference. People always thought this was too humorous to compare it to this. And people always joke in Trek circles and call it basically the fried egg virus. And people will know when they see the episode. I cannot remember the name, the life of me, but it's where they go to this planet where there's these organic things that fly around that look like fried eggs flying around. They're essentially supposed to be like cells, and they latch onto a human, inject spores, kind of like this does, and that person slowly, organically starts to turn into like with the flood internally. You don't see it visually, except maybe for like a rash or something like that, or a bite mark. But then it gets spread and goes from planet to planet to planet. In the show version versus the book version, the show version basically was they expose it to a certain type of extreme UV light, and it kills it. And they're able to mirror it to other areas of this one planet. In the book version, it's closer to the flood, where it's one central brain that basically telepathically quantumly links to anywhere in the galaxy to it. And they go to this, they trace in the book version, they trace the planets back to like a mother brain type of deal. They send some photon torpedoes down on the mother brain, and Spock at the time's infected with this, and he could feel it dying. He could even hear it screaming and stuff like that. But in the show version, you don't see the mother brain thing. It's just they discover that light actually destroy certain types of light waves, destroy it. The book version is more I'm thinking a slight adaptation of the flood. They show a little bit of that in the show version, but the alternate timeline one was the mother brain aspect of it. And so it's very, very similar. I always say when disclosure goes across multiple things and it's similar or the same thing in some variant or another, it's essentially a type of disclosure that they are saying something that did happen, or is happening. So somewhere. And I know there's one other reference I got in a channeling many years ago. We can always have who comes through vet this, but because we even saw that there were ships that were being infected, and it looked kind of like almost like if you had a collection of cobwebs, like in an old tomb, like in Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark sort of thing, where you have like the cobwebs and stuff everywhere. It would also Star Trek Voyager. There was this species that ran across, and they decomposed. There were all these webs and crap everywhere when the bodies decomposed. But with this, it was a mixture of like the flood and that, where these cobweb-looking things would get on the inside of spaceships and start infecting it. And then now that you're talking about the flood in this way, and the biblical ark references, everything. This is actually some things that did happen. Like in times of Atlantis, when there was a nuclear bomb that went off on Atlantis, and there was one in Egypt that turned it to green glass. And that green glass of Tektite can essentially be found in Egypt from an actual nuclear blast going off. There's also up in the Celtic world, I saw this years ago, where there were these stone structures that were vitrified that had a drip pattern away from the center of the Atlantic. And that's the trajectory of it. And that's where the nuclear blast went off, hence fires and floods. Well, this other species that we ran into had kind of like a set of flood quality to them, but it just looked like a bunch of cobwebs going all over people. And the different types you were describing looked kind of similar in its own way, but if you made a cobweb like almost like cocoon-esque version of those, not quite bulbous and fleshy, but it's more like cobwebbish, and spiderwebbish look to them. That's the type that I've seen. Those are the different references that I know about galactically. There's also there was a planet years ago. I did got this in channeling again. We'd have to revet this, but about where there was a civilization where they tested a zombie virus out. They called it the planet named Zir, but I don't know how accurate that is. It may be like a cuss word in some alien language for all I know. But there I saw that this one civilization had a zombie plague happen. That's similar to our Walking Dead, and other channelers have gotten similar information. I didn't even know this to corroborate a little bit of it. You can't always trust that as corroboration, because sometimes you might be getting the same lie over and over again too. But whereas the Orions would just infect different worlds to test out different contagions to use in places to improve themselves, kind of like the Borg would do to assimilate, or they test out a flood-like virus or the vampiric plant-like material and all this other stuff. They test these things out in different places so they knew when to use it here. And AI constructs in different places. They knew how to use it here. Basically training their own AI or training their own people at how to do it. But they wipe out civilizations in the process. Excuse me. But yeah, this I find that fascinating. That this is an interesting topic for a Halloween episode. It fits quite well. Yeah, and this is a good topic, folks, for us to get into the whole Halo verse. It's so conducive to stuff we've been speaking about. So I'll see who it is. More than likely, it's going to be Isaac, Elena, and Vesta today, or the Forest people. So speak to them quite a bit. Oh, it's going to. Oh, okay. It's one of you two this time. It's going to be Elena this time. Okay, this actually should be interesting. You know, also, at this time, I open this circle to true benevolence only with no conflicting agendas for this particular channel. Folks, I should probably be doing that at the beginning of the episode, but I forgot to do it this time. So, all right. See, ooh, hang on. We got something heavy here. When I started cross comparing things, that's when something major gets mad. So, now when I go, you always want to look across multiple platforms, multiple shows, multiple movies. You will see this, of course, like those. You have the whole Alien franchise with Prometheus and that virus, that whole thing. That I think would be a great thing in and of itself to touch into the Alien verse at some point. That I think that'd be awesome. But with the xenomorphs and the ancient aliens, all of it. Okay, Elena. All right. Ooh, what is this heavy, Elena? What is it? Boy, they're really sending the signal in today. Damn. Right. Oh, there we go. Man, that was pretty wretched. I have my cell phone up here doing a secondary recording up here, and they were sending some creepy signal through that a second ago here. That was pretty wretched, but it hits you in the chest, and it feels like it's just pressing on the head and chest when that happens. So, in a bad way. If you get a high intense energy or really fast moving energy that's benevolent, sometimes you'll just get head pressure. People usually screw those two things up. So, or mistake them for one another. Okay, Elena, we'll just do this then. Yes, this is Elena. The reason for the intense pressure is, of course, the subject matter. This he is correct on. This had happened in the extreme ancient times. There was also some of your, you'll say GF type references if you see movies like, say, 65, or movies or games like Halo, or history like that, or some of the Star Trek histories. You'll see that there was, of course, a precursor race. And set of races that existed in space before Earth, like in your 65, Earth was unknown territory, even though the asteroid was thrown at the planet by Galactic so that they could colonize. They wouldn't get eaten alive. Some of your stone bluffs are actually tree stumps that were mined by ancient galactics. And the fact that you have ones that look like Mayans, yes, there were some out there that came to Earth, and you have your ancient Mayan cultures and Mu and whatnot. They're descendants of that. But aside from that, yes, these depictions of the flood, from what I understand, are quite accurate to extreme antiquity, like in the hundreds of thousands to millions of years. And what he was talking about the cobweb look, this is exactly what it looks like mixed with what you see in your game. Your compartmentalized government projects are well aware of some of these different virus, both vampiric, werewolf, cat, werecat, werebear, they have this too, and other zombie-esque and vampiric variants such as the plant one he mentioned, are pretty creepy, by the way. And that cobweb, fleshy, bulbous look, which it is plant and spore based, basically like the mycelium network that you have in your Star Trek Discovery, where they warp from one area of the galaxy to the other, the universe to the other. So It's essentially a corruption of that to an extent, but it can actually travel fibrously, kind of like almost like an insulation fibrous through the vastness of space. And you may ask how, and it does not necessarily need an asteroid to do this. It is essentially, if you saw it, it would look almost like basically silly string being spread or and a mix of cobwebs and cotton candy flying around. If you saw this, it's actually quite gross. And like if somebody was spraying insulation in an attic mixed in with silly string and cobwebs. And also can then form these bulbous, fleshy things. It is barely in existence now. This was indeed created in a laboratory, not just necessarily by the Orions. The Orions exploited this. He thinks that they created this. It was actually other alien races that were creating different things, very much like your forerunners and your precursors. These are like the old ones in your Babylon 5, as he said. But there were older races that were trying to find ways of keeping themselves alive, keeping themselves in and evolve into different forms. In your Star Trek Enterprise, he forgot to add there was this retrovirus that the Archer and the Enterprise crew come across, where it turns them into a member of the species looking for their lost city of Requat. And there are this other species trying to essentially flame bomb this virus wherever it popped up, because it had basically transformed tons and tons of their people on their homeworld, and they learned to glass essentially their own world. They took this a little bit from Halo, but they used the scorched earth policy and not necessarily just glassing in the show War. With this, it transformed one set of person, one person into another person by basically a certain set of pre-programmed parameters within that viral coding. Essentially, one frequency turning into the torsion field of another in that way, assimilating through viral contagion. This is also another similarity to what has been done out there. The species that were around then, some of them were assimilated by the Orions, and they broke into this space-time, and they took all the knowledge those people had before and found, from their amazement, wonders to behold. I think it's pretty gross, mind you, but from their perspective, a scientist, decrepit, almost like an old man form, like your Emperor on Star Wars. This would, to them, it was of great benefit, and they experimented with it ad nauseum. Then you had other species creating the werewolf contagion. Your Antiqua was trying to recreate themselves on the Earth. It made werewolves. Then, of course, you had the Orions that created the vampire contagion based on some of the stuff they found and their own tweaking. So this is some of ancient history in a nutshell. I can go into questions if you like.
I don't know exactly what to ask. Really don't. I guess I would say, does like a high, I guess, a flag outbreak occur in today's world based on what your race knows about what's going on out there and what exists?
Sometimes they will let viruses unleashed here on the Earth to make people more immune to what is out there. It's not right. This is not necessarily what happened with your COVID or anything like that. That was malicious, but on a white hat side, there has been some infectious viruses and diseases that have been put out there. Africa was a place they've been testing it out on. Your black hats have been doing this. This is interesting that they showed Africa as a place they glassed. But they have been inoculating people that way. And also sometimes putting under the guise of something horrible. Sometimes they are under guise of control. Remember, anything out the public is narrative. So some of the things you think are control are things being inoculating people. Like sometimes in chemtrails, somebody of course is dumbing you down. Of course, the Draco dumbing you down. But then there are other forces that unleash it for good. This is why in his head he was seeing himself as one of the good factions in more of an imaginary sequence, where he was saying, we'll just, people know chemtrails, we'll just inoculate people this way. He was seeing this in his head, and this happens to be true. Whereas you're being prepared for the greater galactic community. Imagine a greater organization trying to inoculate people that don't know they exist. This does happen to at least 30% of what you're seeing out there now. There are viruses out there that would harm you fairly significantly without these things. And the fact that your cabal is disguising their control with a lot of what they call altruism and benevolence, which is anything but. This is what some of the things going on now. One of the virus variants that actually does exist in your galaxy, aside from what the flood has been mentioned, is a flu-like type of bug, or a flu cold type bug. They mentioned it in your Stargate Atlantis, where it got trapped on certain planets in the Pegasus galaxy on that show, where every known Stargate traveler had this weird flu cold like variant. That is an actual piece of current galactic data that is out there right now. Not just history, but it is concurrent to the now moment. Whereas there is this weird bug that's out there, and your COVID was like a combination of cold, flu, and pneumonia in that way, but it was also on a nano level. And as is the vaccine, the bad one anyway. So in this, there is that, and there are a few warnings for some viral contagions on different alien worlds that only affect certain aliens and humans. It would affect as well, like in your Babylon 5. Was a race called the Packlets, and the other race that also died of this disease, and they thought it was more of their god culling them, or thought they weren't worthy or something like that. In the show, this race, when they got closer together, when they were scared, is when they died. There are particular contagions like those two, the Packlets and the other one, when they got when that particular type of virus was only harmful to some people with certain genomic sequences or a similar genomic sequence, very much like your Tut curse history, where it went after a family. Very similar. There was one just like that in Tut's tomb, by the way. And also some ancient tombs you have yet to uncover on Earth that contain these time capsules from hell. There are a couple of things that would be useful to you to create inoculations for things in space that crash ships and the like. But there are virus variants that are slightly stronger than what you are used to here on the Earth, that there are good forces helping you get inoculated. So another reason that you cannot quite join the galactic community just yet in that way. But there are some good people actually looking out for you in that particular respect.
Okay. And does your race think, like, what does your race think of the possibility of some kind of disease, homogeneous way?
Well, the possibility of one of these diseases hitting Earth is not necessarily as high as you would think, because each race that comes and goes is screened very, very heavily. Granted, there always is that wild card that gets through, but it is actually the threat from the outside is quite low unless you had races portaling in on a regular basis, even though in your military bases they do. They are heavily inoculated and they wear protective gear that you don't necessarily see. He sees it as protective gear is just against energies. It's against contagions and poisons, and the reverse is true as well. So the chance of you getting some alien bug, even from where our people had come from, is actually quite low.
I meant just the concept of such a disease.
The concept of such a disease as the flood. Yes, there is something, like I said, very similar to this, but it is actually negligible. There were, again, people saving it in petri dishes, like you saw on the rings ships, and there are ring ships very similar. Like there's one in your one of your. There are some in distant galaxies as well. That do have similar technology as rings surrounding sun or Dyson sphere type technology. But the disease, this particular type 1, it's quite low because of the fact that it's been nearly eradicated. But like you said to him earlier, it is impossible to 100% eradicate something, and inoculations have been found against it But there are, again, ancient sites where other races were either screwing around with it or trying to cure it, very much exactly like you see in Halo, where they were trying to study it and it kept backfiring. But there has been a cure found for the most part of this, and it is a sentient virus. There was laws against, of course, killing all of something sentient, but there have been stipulations found for not necessarily it as a virus, but it as a sentient being. There are other places it can go, other things it can do. It's not exactly similar to what you see as the Flood, but it was close enough to it warranted major attention at one point in galactic history.
Okay. And then I guess my final answer would be, if some sort of need arose, are there things out there that would just wipe out all life in an instant, like the Halos?
Mm-hmm. Yes. The big weapons like your Death Star type of thing or the Halo rings. Yes, you bet there are. There are very few races that have them, though. There are some races that survived the Orion Wars and never were really touched by them, that got shattered by them. Some species had to join with other species uh, in order to preserve their DNA. Some of those species came here. But yes, there are bigger weapons. Some of your moons, like your Titan and whatnot, and also some of the Death Star weapons that were weapons of Asgard, for instance. Even your own moon is one of those, but that particular weapon is no longer functioning. And the Soul Trap is no longer functioning either. It was warned about in your ancient Buddhist myths and such, but it is no longer completely functioning. But there are other species out there, even some from other galaxies, not only that can portal using a big ringed ship, just like in your Ahsoka TV show, where they could go across galaxies, but they could also use a ring, exactly like what you're seeing, to not only form a portal to transport, but also open a portal and destroy a planet with. Unfortunately, these things do exist.
Okay. Well, that's all I have for this episode. Thank you for your information.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this was actually quite enjoyable. The debate, this being this time of year, the energies are rather shaky for himself and doing this, but since he's made the communication arcs, this is why we encouraged him to do this long before so they could acclimate to the way the Earth energies. Now, Halloween is the strongest time of year for, as you would call, the veils dropping and dimensional contact and the like. So thank you all for this. We look forward to the next one. Thank you.
But
Yeah, I could see that in my head. I could see the ship, the Halo ring looked similar. It looked like the one that's on Ahsoka as well, with the ringed vessel as well. It's very similar, where um, it would basically open its own portal. Star Trek Voyager had it too, where somebody made a big ringed ship and was able to use it like a slingshot. It would shut down after they used it one time. Voyager uses it one time as well to shoot maybe 10 or 12 years off shave that off of their journey. Uh, but it opens a portal. The ship showing me it opens a portal and can actually fold into itself and then go through the portal. It opened and then reopen on the other side, kind of like like Doctor Who TARDIS, where it appears one place and disappears one place and reappears another. It can literally fold and shoot over here doing frequencies, and it's a frequency thing, opening a portal where you have frequency here, frequency here. You make this frequency come over here and then match this, and it moves over here. It's kind of the same thing with the rings. It's the same thing with the weapons, where you align a central set of, like, both some in cases temporal coordinates and spatial coordinates, or if you want to keep it concurrent with the right time frame, you have to make sure that you add you basically, it's the same as accounting for continental drift. It has to be astrological movements, but with this, you can target any planet if you can just find the frequency of that planet and the particular time frame in which you are hitting as well. Essentially, like in what was shown in Star Trek, where they said each person is born in a particular time frame, it has their own frequency as well. That's why the character of Giorgio is going through aphasia, temporal aphasia, because she was from the parallel universe and from the past as well. That's why humans lost consciousness in that as well. That's what they were hinting as a type of aphasia at that point. But this, because the person couldn't return to that frequency, so they died. And they showed time agents being the same. This is the same concept. It's the same concept for a lot of these different types of things. where they could fire a weapon like that. And that's kind of the information she was putting in my head as she was talking. She was giving me the information on how the weapons operate and stuff like that. So obviously, in the Cassiopeian system, where her people are from, they obviously had stuff like that. And I was told Cassiopeia is the basis for some of the stuff you see on Star Wars. Anyway, uh, everything else is more Star Trek. Star Wars was more kind of like in the Cassiopeian system because they had Mandalorian type order, they had Jedi like order, all of those sorts of things, military, science, magic, a lot of that. So, and in their ancient times. So in the Pleiades, it was kind of similar too. So, yeah, I thought that was actually interesting. That was the download she gave me before she detached. So, uh, that was a lot, but I was seeing like this blue like ring with like how it was with the halo ring in the center, but it actually what it did is it arced into the center with almost like this weird etheric electricity, and it portaled itself either over a planet or the beam over a planet. And like in one of the Chris Pine Star Trek movies, the first one where like the Romulan captain shoots the mining ship beam down on the planet and drills, it was kind of the same thing and would just uncreate the planet and turn it into like fuel. That's kind of what I was seeing with this other thing. So and just it would just vaporize and just melt away and be gone. So and it, obviously it was used probably during the Orion Wars, I'm guessing, a Lyran conflict. But anyway, that is what the download I got. So I don't know if you have anything else to add, Ryan, before we take this out.
Not really. Just that if you guys have the opportunity in the next few weeks and you want to learn more about the flood, there's a lot of really good YouTube videos out there by great people that are like dedicated to making Halo lore stuff. So if you're interested in the topic, definitely go check their stuff out because they're going to go into more detail than I could ever go into in like a 1 hour thing here.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Haloverse is quite diverse. I'm glad we're going into this. It's extreme. There's a lot of disclosure in the
Yeah,
Halo.
there's
So,
and Halo has also like 30 years of books. So
mm-hmm. Oh yeah, very very interesting. Yeah. So okay, at this moment in time, I close this circle with true benevolence and no conflicting agendas. Thank you everybody for watching this show. We enjoyed making this, and happy Halloween, everybody. Bye bye now.
happy Halloween.
Oh, here is something interesting that my brain suddenly, even through the channel, who's channeling Elena, could not pull out of my brain. Somebody was pulling this out, but this had to do with the star Cygnus, and the one with the ring, like in Halo Infinite, and the ringed Dyson sphere type things. Star Trek Next Generation had the whole Dyson sphere where it was around the sun. So did Star Trek Discovery. That was the species found beyond the rift that also communicated through dust too. But there's also in the Cygnus star system, they measured there is a structure that passes in front of the sun all the time that surrounds the sun, and it's like a ring exactly like that it's so massive that they know it's artificial. And they would know this. How? They more than likely went there and looked. That's the capability of our government, Star Trek level technology, Martian Germans, but they're not saying Martian Germans went there and looked. No, they wouldn't say the one of the most evil regimes on our planet were the ones that looked. No. Like in the movie Contact with the big orbital structure. Also, the signal that was sent out to space was of Hitler. They were trying to say Hitler preceded us. Even the one woman, they made it so that it was a black person that said it too. Of course that shithead had to be our ambassador to space. That was a bit of disclosure. But what I'm also trying to say about Cygnus is Cygnus had this measurable thing around the sun. And I had a channel years ago by a being called David, and or David, I suppose, David. And he said his people had to migrate to Earth and merge with our own genetically because their planet was destroyed because by not liking source that thought they were too unbalanced. That some of those people were so incestuous, so all of this, so into being unbalanced genetically and spiritually that they were set for destruction by source. kind of like the Vader premise, where he was the destined one to balance the Force kind of thing, where he went from light, dark, light, where he destroyed both Sith and Jedi. So that will be in the Vader conversation. Me and Ryan will eventually do those, and it's very interesting. That's the lore behind Star Wars. Star Trek, I could recite chapter and verse, but Star Wars, there is some holes in there I don't know, and there's some I do. So now, with the Cygnus thing, David told me his planet got destroyed. There was also this other being I won't repeat the name for that said she was the embodiment of destruction. There is no embodiment of destruction like Shiva or anything like that. If you go backwards in evolution, you're an abomination. Even in a kinder way, Bashar has said things like that. Others have said things like that. That there's some truth in some of the insiders, and there's some not so much. There's other insiders that have said something similar, a mix between all the above. And then I ended up finding this out, but that was more like, Ryan that destroyed their world and said, oh, they were evil. But if their worlds get destroyed, what happens? They have to merge another culture, like polar bears. Environment disappearing, what happens? They go into Canada and they merge with Kodiak grizzlies. That's where you get those hybrids from. Like this one person shot this bear and saw that they looked strange and had black skin and brown and white hair. It was a merging of polar bear and a grizzly, Kodiak grizzly. So they said, oh, this was an unnatural hybrid. No, this is how things happen. David told me his people came to Earth and their genome got mixed in. And somebody was obviously performing an experiment and knowing that they would be corralling David's people, who looked kind of like Klingons in a way, but had a crow's foot head ridge that came in like this. The Klingons, though, were look was more like a Tuathan look or an elf look. They're more elementalish. Franco or St. Francis is one of those looking over a space garden, and unfortunately Metatron was one of these that got assimilated, and that's an AI premise that's out right now, used as a meat puppet to become an AI premise, very much like the Flood turned somebody's brain into a slave meat puppet. Similar type premise for like Borgish assimilation processes. So just like the Borg in Star Trek. So this, though, he said came to a city of stone, which I found out was Göbekli Tepe, and then the Flood began. I'm thinking Enlil didn't like all the mixes of people, along with the Nephilim, the merging of the DNAs. So this is something Bjorn and I have been toying with. There's a really long conversation we're going to post here at some point that I'm going to have to really refine it down, but had to do with Enlil being crowned Lord High Commander and all this other stuff. Very fascinating conversation we had. It started out as a session, but it went down a big rabbit hole with Enki, Enlil, and Anu, and the days of the Illuminati Leash. So look out for that on the subscription at some point. Not going to be anytime soon, unfortunately, because I got other things behind it, but you get the idea. But the premise of this was also the Flood began. I also had a giant premise that was or expression that was around at that time that was underground, sleeping, felt the water over him, and before I confronted this, I always felt this water weight on top of me like I was claustrophobic, and he hated it. No, that was an aspect of Torah and Kal, and he hated it. Wanted to be out on the surface, but it was like the Flood was like 10 years or more before the waters receded. I asked Anu at the time what happened with the salt content, how it didn't kill all the plants. They said they had the ability to remove that and revive the plants. So they said that was interesting, that was the question I honed in on at the time. But anyway, Odin / Anu act like he was part of that in some fashion at the time. There was also some things understated. This is why I couldn't get anyone to answer who crowned Enlil Lord High Commander. More than likely it was his father, because of Enki going to Africa, starting money, and Anu sending Enlil for everything else. I'm not going to go into that conversation too much. Just know that the people of Cygnus came here, merged with our genome, and their people melded into ours. I'm thinking that some of the Turkish people as well, because they looked Turkish, just like a group I saw in the Secret Space program where the Nazis were calling a planet called Lystaria, and those people were Turkish. Again, that's another conversation, SSP conversation. It matches, of course, with some of the Halo stuff, but more likely for the Spartan program conversation. But with this premise, I'll end this here. Just know that City of Stone seemed to resemble like Rivendell or something like that. It was Göbekli Tepe, but it was much larger. There's a lot of it that hasn't been found. There's a nearby Mount Ararat. Of course, they found the underground cabin that was Noah's Ark, but where my counterpart was. But there was more to that. I kept seeing a city carved in underground into stone into the side like Rivendell in Lord of the Rings, and that was part of it. That then they discovered. Roughly around the same time, I had the visions about it. Like the discovery of it was uprooting energetic benevolent Kejik information, which is what can happen if the energies were stirred enough. History was coming back out again. Then part of that was discovered around that time, and Göbekli Tepe was discovered for that reason. Even the little model that was used to create it, it was the blueprint or macro-micro. Blueprints follow the macro-micro or the above so below magic. So magic or high enough up that it's a high science. Like anybody would build a house, plan it out, build it. But this is it's very, very interesting how that coincides with energies being seen this way and something being discovered, but also the energies stirring up because the benevolent Kejik and benevolent source creator are ready to have it come out. And the whole temporal Mandela effect is the tampering with time and everything is ready to regurgitate that lost history, like the Tartarian Empire. So I find that interesting. It all coincided. But that goes with some of this information. So it is 7:57 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Thursday, October 19th, 2023. Thank you. Oh, what was forgotten was in the show was about how a zombie virus can infect bugs, and it's based on mushrooms, just like The Last of Us, just like I said, but I neglected to say the real-life application of it. Certain bugs can be taken over by this fungus, and then they become the carriers by which then the others become infected. They're dead. Their brain is being controlled just exactly like what you're seeing, and also like in The Last of Us with the infected food. I haven't seen it. We were just going on what Joanna's son Andrew was telling us. So about it, we have not seen the series yet. I've heard it's very good, though. At the time of this recording, I haven't seen it yet. But at the same moment, on the same thread, that is actually a real concept that is being carried by both food, like with our poison GMOs to make people dumber, so it self-farms chemicals off of us. Other ETs also farm chemicals out of our organs and such by things we consume, just like the elephant consuming the coffee beans, fermenting them in its bowels, and now you have those creepy coffee beans that people call elephant poop coffee. It's called something else, and they mentioned it on Pawn Stars once too, and Rick thought it was gross. But the point is, these things, the zombified things and the chemical rape basically from people is happening. It's not just loosh energy. There's also in the foods and the GMOs where it gets turned into a chemical in your system, makes people feel dumber. Also, you have the fluoride and stuff that's out there too in the water, and in the toothpaste and everything, fluoride toothpaste. But then this gel, this hand sanitizer looking gel, is farmed by some galactics to use, then either back in the food or sell. So it's like a crop being farmed in many respects, just like when I went to the Precious Moments Museum where I saw Jesus in a diorama over some kids harvesting crops. That's essentially explained it right there. One of the creepiest things is hybrid children. That's what the precious moments are, but you get the idea. The same is with this disease like this. Somebody could cultivate that in a body and then manufacture it and put it out there, turn it into a plant too, which is stupid. But if you wanted to not only infect somebody but farm it, there you go. But the bugs are a prime example, where there's those types of moths, grasshoppers, spiders, everything that get infected by it, and it has that spiky look to it, like you see the flood. One could say that is also like a biblical flood, but in a viral way. Hence why they called it by that name in the games. But you see, if you flip something like that, you can turn it into a farm. Hence also with the with what happened in 2020 and the subsequent vaccines. Also, people, I want to say, I realize you're pointing out that I shouldn't be saying COVID and saying vaccines because of the cancellation thing. I'm thanking you for that, but at the same time, don't always point it out. I'm trying to make a point to compare it, and I don't feel I should have to mince words or beat around the bush to do it. So, we do have a Rumble account as a backup, and we do have an AWS account as a backup for our websites. So we are fine. Just don't point it out, but I thank you for the concern for people that have said this to us in the past several months. So I'll leave this here. Just know that this is, I wanted to explain a thing about what was missed there in the conversation. So it is 8:43 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Thursday, October 19th, 2023. Thank you. One more reference. I know, per the joke, make one sci-fi reference, make 42 of them. But The Expanse, I mentioned that, but there's a scene where with Thomas Jane where he sees the girl that they've been looking for in season 1 completely enveloped by it was basically like a nanovirus, essentially, and where they crashed the ship into Venus. Season 2, Adam Savage of Mythbusters is one of them in a ship that gets assimilated by that. So, I find that interesting. But the girl that was in it was like how the flood would envelop someone that you saw in that scene Ryan and I were showing you. So in that image, very similarly applied. So I just realized there's certain things that went slightly unsaid. I know somebody will think I'm being too anal, but it is what it is. So it is 8:50 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Thursday, October 19th, 2023. Thank you.